Comment area. This bright black adjustment method is roughly divided into 3 steps. Which 3 steps are they? 1 is touch, 2 is observation, and 3 is diagnosis. Let's take a look. Which one should we touch first? Let's touch the door leaf. Are the upper and lower corners both in the same plane? If there is a warped corner or a sash, we have to cure the warped corner of the sash first. Cure the disease we have found first, and then we will continue to cure the next disease. Now look at the opening leaf. This is the opening leaf. This is the opening leaf. The opening leaf here is already at 0 distance. There is no space to go down. The space below is very large. For problems like this, retract the upper lotus leaf and release the lower lotus leaf to adjust the gap on the opening. Because if there is no gap on the opening, it should be scratched. Let's take a look. Scratches are already happening on the opening. The door is not working properly now. Next, let's take a look at the harmonious adjustment method. Now, this lotus leaf is the one we repair and diagnose. The upper lotus leaf needs to shrink the space, and the lower lotus leaf needs to be widened and relaxed. Let's open the door and take a look at the arrangement of the lotus leaves. This door has a total of 4 lotus leaves. These lotus leaves have these screws, 3 on this side and 2 on this side. These are fixing screws, and they are all in a tightened state. For the sake of our intuitive practice, I replaced these 2 screws with these protruding cross screws. Normally, this screw is flat, not protruding so much. Then there is another one with a hexagon socket. The hexagon socket screw does not have a cap in front, but a hexagon socket. It is equivalent to a top screw. When it pushes inward, the lotus leaf can move left and right. Now we need to pull this lotus leaf inward to close the space inward. First, let's loosen these 2 adjustment lotus leaves first. After loosening them, the lotus leaf will no longer be affected by the top screw's pushing force. Let's tighten all the tightening screws. While tightening, you will find that the lotus leaf often closes on the sides. If the tightening force is not enough, you can continue to adjust it. Now let's try to see if the top is still rubbing against the door frame. Now the top is no longer rubbing against the door frame, and there is a gap. What do we need to do next? What we need to do is to adjust the gaps between the top and the bottom to be roughly the same. Now, relatively speaking, the top is small and the bottom is large. Now we can compare the lotus leaf album. The lotus leaf album is large on the top and small on the bottom. The bottom is almost 0 distance, but it has space, which is very small. Let's relatively open the bottom a little bit. Let's open the door a little bit. Let's open the bottom a little bit and look at the lotus leaf. If we want to put this lotus leaf, first, let's loosen the fastening screws a little bit. Loosen it a little bit. After loosening it all, start to tighten the adjustment screws about 2 or 3 turns. Let's try not to tighten it too much at once. If you tighten it too much, it will be bigger. Let's take a look at adjusting the lotus leaf and look at the door. Now there is an obvious gap at the bottom. There is an obvious gap. Relatively speaking, our door is now adjusted well. Now it won't scratch when opening and closing the door. And the gaps up, down, left, and right are almost the same. If it is the lotus leaf in the middle also has problems. Like this section, it is also scratched. It doesn't matter. Let's adjust the 2 lotus leaves in the middle. Adjust the 2 lotus leaves in the middle to the left and right. If it is to the left, the space in this area will be larger and the space in this area will be smaller. Relatively speaking, because the size of its total frame is fixed, the door can only move in the middle. The adjustment method is like this. First, loosen the fastening screw. Loosen the fastening screw. Tighten the fastening screw. When tightening the adjustment screw, the door leaf will move toward the opening side. At the same time, adjust the fastening screw in the opposite direction and the door leaf will move toward the lotus leaf axis. Our goal is to make the door leaf in the middle. After it is in the middle, The gaps up, down, left, and right are almost even. In this way, our adjustment goal is achieved. Okay, this video ends here. If you have any questions about anti-theft doors, please leave a message in the